I wanted to ask you about the other Jacobo, because I read in one of the books I found on Audible about Jacobo Grinberg that there's talk of a different Jacobo, about the other Jacobo Grinberg. Who was he or what? Because I think you researched it a bit more than I did. I just saw it in passing. Well, the first thing I read was in his autobiography, and it surprised me a lot. And then I investigated it with his family and friends. I mean, when Grinberg was in Spain around the late 80s or mid-80s, a friend of his told him there was another Jacobo Grinberg. This other Jacobo Grinberg was a professor. They called him the Old Man, and he was a Jewish American who was teaching at a university in the US. And apparently he was researching phenomena similar to Grinberg's studies of the mind, the brain, consciousness. And this man, it seems, one day was giving a class and told his students, look, I'm going to leave the university and tomorrow I'm going to retire to an Indian reservation. I don't remember the name of the reservation now, but I had noted somewhere. And he was going there to study the spirit and consciousness. And if any of them wanted to go with him, he would wait for them at 9 a.m. at the train station. So, the next day, 5 of these students went there, and he had a paper with the names of the 5 students who showed up, as if he already knew who would come. And they spent 2 years researching, well, more like developing the spirit, consciousness, according to what they say. And after 2 years, one day, this other Jacobo Grinberg, called Jacobo Albert Grinberg, the Old Man, well, this man went for a walk in the woods and suddenly vanished, and nothing was ever heard of him again. This was told by José Colastra, who organized the conferences in Spain, because one of these students was a friend of his. He never wanted to reveal the name of this student to me. So Grinberg is told this, and Grinberg is left surprised. In fact, Colastra contacts Grinberg because he wanted to read some of the books by this other Jacobo Grinberg. And the book he finds when he goes to a library that is by Jacobo Grinberg Zilberbaum, or Jacobo Grinberg, let's say. And that's how they met, according to what he told me. So, of course, the case of whether this story of the other, I was looking for this other Jacobo Grinberg, if there are books, evidence, I mean, I haven't found anything. It would be good if someone expert in research and all this could find out if this other Jacobo Grinberg really existed. If you think, I can give you the contact. If he didn't exist, it means someone invented this other Jacobo. Could be. Well, you always have to consider this possibility. I don't know why someone would invent it, but someone could have invented it. Anyway, the fact is that Jacobo Grinberg is told this story, and 4 years after writing it in his biography, he himself disappears. So, what is documented is that Grinberg talks about another Jacobo Grinberg who vanishes 4 or 5 years later, right? No, 3 years after writing it or publishing the book where he tells it, he himself disappears, vanishes for us too. This is what surprised me the most. And so when I asked people about this other Jacobo Grinberg in my documentary, for example, it doesn't appear because the data I collected was a bit vague and because in the end, well, I dropped it, right? But whoever talks to me about this always talks about, yes, there was another Jacobo Grinberg who also disappeared, and he writes it 3 years before he does, right? Things like that. But no one tells me the story well. The only one who told it well was José Colastra, but he didn't give me specific details of who had told him. And so his brother, for example, Jerry, also told me a bit of the story, but he also remembered little about it. And he added one more note, which is that Grinberg also puts it in the book, because when this other Jacobo Grinberg disappears, vanishes, Jacobo's calculations, or Jacobo, so to speak, say that he was 9 or 11 years old at that time. I don't remember. Oh, so he was a child? He was still a child. And then he remembers that when he was little, there was a voice that came to him and said, acquire the knowledge of this book. And Grinberg said he had done it many times and would put his hands on a book. And it was as if all the information from the book directly into his brain without even reading it. So hypothetically, that's how he learned extraocular vision. Well, he doesn't talk about extraocular vision because he wasn't reading with his hands. But with the contact of his hands, he acquired all the information from the book at once. But yes, it could be something similar, but it's not like he was reading. It was like instant information, like in the Matrix when they put a chip in you and you learn karate. Well, he tells it in his book, in his autobiography. And his brother says that Jacobo had told him that when he was little, another Jacobo Grinberg had gotten inside him. As if when this other Jacobo disappeared from this Indian reservation and vanished into the woods, Grinberg felt that this other Jacobo Grinberg had gotten inside him. and had been guiding him in some way towards what he had to study or know. And that's what I can tell you about the other Jacobo Grinberg. Hey, and about him vanishing, what are the strongest theories you consider there are right now? Because I know it's a bit complicated when talking about this. I don't know if you remember in 2014 when the Malaysia Airlines plane vanished, and there was a lot of speculation because of some fake videos that came out. In this case, well, in 2021, you had to talk to the family. I know the family has even been upset with some people who have speculated about what happened, but according to what you've investigated and with the people you've talked to, what do you think happened to Jacobo? Do you think they have him hidden somewhere? Do you think they killed him? What do you think happened? Well, the truth is, I've been asked this question many times, and I don't have a clear answer. And I think it depends on how I look at the case. I can lean one way or another. That is, let's say if I look at it through Padilla's eyes and from rational, empirical evidence, well, there are many testimonies, there's a lot of data that make one lean towards the position of thinking that he was really kidnapped or was taken forcibly but without violence to the other side of the U and study there within some secret program like Stargate or another. But of course, the evidence we have regarding this is the witness from Boulder who sees him being taken off the plane, the strange behavior of his wife Teresa, who obviously knows something, knows what happened to him because Grinberg disappears. No one ever sees him again except for the Boulder witness, who, if we believe them, on January 5th, that is, a month after the disappearance, sees him being taken off in Boulder, Colorado. But Teresa is seen. She's seen leaving her things at home. She's seen leaving the dog with her mother. She calls her mother 6 months later from Rosarito, Baja California, meaning she's still seen until she disappears too. But she disappears voluntarily. That's evident. So, well, this theory is out there. The thing is, we don't know who he went to study with or who he went to investigate with. I mean, we can make conjectures, we can speculate and think that he was funded by some organization. Daniel Golden also talks about it in his book, about how university professors are forced to do research, or sometimes scientists from other countries are recruited at conferences. And the modus operandi is quite similar to Grinberg's. The wife is nearby, they fund conferences, they recruit them until they take them away. But well, these are speculations. In reality, it's like putting different ingredients into a soup and imagining that this could have happened. I've heard so many versions. I heard that Russian intelligence was looking for Jacobo and that they came for him and took him to Russia. But this for which there is no evidence. No, I'm letting you know these are the rumors that have been heard. A bunch of things have been heard. Yes, but there are many rumors. I think we need to rely on data more or less. That is, we can speculate, but with data that leads us there. Because if we start imagining, for example, it's more plausible that he vanished and moved to another dimension. There is more evidence of that than that the Russians took him, for example. And what are those proofs? Well, what Grinberg himself leaves us written in his books, like his previous life in Andromeda. He tells us that 12 years ago he was in Andromeda. He was called Hadesus and was punished for entering the forbidden zone of the universe 12 or 11 earthly reincarnations ago. And he was in his last earthly reincarnation. And in his books he tells us that even a medium named Myra tells him that she has contacted Kardam, who is his father and master from Andromeda, and that he will soon call him to go with him. Grinberg writes this in The Vital Force, from the previous sky to the end of the book, when he recaps about Myra and tells us that she is saying that he will come to get him soon. 2 or 3 years after writing the book, he leaves. In several books talking about crossing a dimensional portal, vanishing from this world and going to the next dimension, even taking his body. There are several events where Grinberg points to this theory, and obviously, well, it's a theory, but there is at least evidence pointing in this direction. Don Juan from Carlos Castaneda, well, Castaneda tells us that Don Juan crosses the border between worlds, also taking his own body, and Castaneda wanted to do the same, but, well, Castaneda did keep his death certificate and his body. But let's say there are people who think Grinberg moved to another dimension, and this at least has, well, there are data that can lead you there, you know? There is another case that also has evidence for me, which is the case I've been covering on my channel, which is the connections Grinberg had with many scientists who were part of the Stargate project, the MKUltra project. According to what you've seen, do you think there's a possibility that this did happen, that they did take him and he's not dead either? If this option exists, whether he's dead or not, that he went to investigate within the Stargate project, well, it's plausible. I mean, there are conferences with Andrija Puharich, who was working on the MK Ultra project, with Jacques Vallée. As you said, I don't know if he was in the Stargate project or not, but he has been very close to programs with the U government, both of the UFO phenomenon and others, right? I mean, and he himself, when he appears on the UFO program and all this, he himself admits to having participated in programs of this type. And in fact, there are things he doesn't say who called him or who, because he can't say. This is documented. Well, yes, he was doing conferences with all these people, and the topics they were discussing at that time were cutting-edge science, extrasensory perception, UFO phenomena. He talks about Andrija Puharich in his books. I've never read any of Grinberg's books that mention Jacques Vallée, but you see them in photos. They're next to each other. That is, they met, they talked. Well, it's a theory. What happens is that Grinberg, according to his brothers, at least David Grinberg says it clearly, that he never wanted to collaborate with universities in the U, or that he had offers to go teach there, research there, and he never wanted to. So it could be that he went to investigate there. The issue is if all these people are working and still alive, apart from Puharich, which is a separate case we can talk about too, but Jacques Vallée is still alive, Dean Redin, who is also in the Stargate project, Hal Puthoff, all these people are there calmly researching and still doing their things. Why not Grinberg? I mean, what happened? Why should he be locked up in a building, as they sometimes say, white, without doors, locked up and never to come out again? And other scientists can be researching this and be there so calmly. I don't understand why he should be locked up. So what happened there is what I don't know. Maybe he went to work with them and something happened, something got out of hand. It seems strange to me that they would have a scientist locked up for 30 years. I mean, really, if you think about it, it's a bit extreme. Looking at other theories of consciousness that have been around over these 30, 40 years, I've had to read Dr. Donald Hoffman's, Dr. Edgar Mitchell's, who was also an astronaut from one of the Apollo missions. And there have been a few others, but I don't know. It gives me the impression that Grinberg's theory is one of the most practically practiced in terms of scientific experiments. Not all are like that. Almost none are like that. They are all theories, and he got into the lab to try to prove the theory in a certain way. So for me, him being one of the most advanced in that sense, that he really took it empirically and had some results, because we can't deny that he had them, for me that gives more credibility to his case. And I think that if something new is really being discovered or was discovered with research based on his theory, it makes sense to me that the people in power would say, well, this guy is doing something important, something that could also have a paradigm shift in everyone. Because imagine if suddenly he was responsible for telling us all, okay, you are capable of doing this, this, and this with your abilities that you have always had. And well, social control is lost within the structures, and especially this machinery that has managed us for so long, the war machine and the religious machine. I don't know, it makes sense to me. I don't know what you think about it. Yes, it's clear to me. It seems clear to me that there might be an interest, or that there has been an interest from the US government or other governments in Grinberg's investigations. Because since the 50s, there have been multi-million-dollar programs based on, where the investigations are based on the phenomenon of extrasensory perception, whether it's telepathy, telekinesis, with remote viewing, that is, how the mind can alter the space of time, how it can affect matter, from the 50s until the program officially ended in January 95. Just when Grinberg disappeared a month later, millions and millions of dollars were spent just on this phenomenon. And Grinberg was clearly a pioneer in this phenomenon. And the peculiarity of Grinberg is that you said he does experiments in the lab, but his experiments are not subjective like Puharich or any of the others. They were based on conducting experiments to see if, for example, telepathy existed, or if objects could be moved with the mind. And that's what was practiced there. They would take psychics, they would take seers, and investigate if their powers were real or not, etc. In Grinberg's case, what he does is measure brain states and see how the brain reacts to certain things, how a brain can be reacting to a stimulus that it is not being subjected to, but rather another person is. Grinberg didn't base it on whether this other person was aware or not, but he was measuring the brain, and he realized that this brain was responding to a stimulus that was being given to another brain. For example, these are data. Statistics are not needed here. That's what Grinberg said. It only needs to happen once, then we are already seeing that there is a real correspondence. Because in subjective statistics, the pattern is very random. He guessed the color, he guessed the rectangle, but it could be coincidence. Even if he does it 100 times, it could be coincidence 100 times, right? It would be very rare, but it could be. In Grinberg's case, no, the brain is having a reaction to a stimulus. It is not being subjected to, even if it happens only 30% of the time. This 30% is already an anomaly, which is no longer an anomaly, it's a reality. That is, a mind can be reacting to a stimulus. It's no longer percentage, it's no longer statistics, it's that this happens. It's like if you suddenly disappear from the car and never reappear, it happened once, but it's real. Yes. You know? So Grinberg was investigating in that sense, and that's why he said that even if only, and it worked a lot, the percentage was 60, 70%, and especially that there were some causes. If the people who were in the potential transfer were twins, for example, or a couple, or there was a lot of connection, the percentage of this happening increased a lot. So, well, yes, there was definitely an interest in Jacobo's studies. But let's suppose that, yes, that they told him, hey, look, you've been funded by us, we've been monitoring you for years. He had also gone many times, according to Padilla, to Boulder, Colorado, without anyone knowing. I mean, maybe he was collaborating with them beforehand. But let's say, yes, that in January 95, on January 5th, he gets off at this airport in Boulder, goes with his wife. Both are forcibly taken to Boulder to study something. Okay, but even if we assume this, what happened next? I mean, what happened next? Why has he never shown any signs of life again? I mean, there are people who say he might be in an insane asylum. There are people. But it's strange, isn't it? I mean, why do you never show signs of life again? Why doesn't he call someone, his daughter? Why doesn't he? I don't know. A part of your investigation that I think you probably haven't had because you don't have knowledge, the idiosyncrasy of some of the media. The Los Angeles Times is one of the newspapers that famously had more agents from the Project Mockingbird operating for them when all this Watergate stuff was discovered. And historically, they have been one of the media outlets that have most tried to debunk this type of phenomenon for one reason or another. So the fact that I saw that a journalist from the Los Angeles Times wanted to cover the Grinberg case, and for him it was a murder of the woman. Yes, what happens is that, let's see, we have to contextualize this because Sam Quiñones, when I interviewed him in 2010, 2011, he at that time is a journalist for the Los Angeles Times. Now, when he is assigned the article about Grinberg, it wasn't him who assigned it. I don't know if he was a journalist for the Los Angeles Times at that time. I don't think so. He might have been at that time too. But who assigns it to him? It's a magazine called New Age Journal. I think it's called New Age Journal or New. I mean the New Age as it's said in English. New Age. New Age, right? It's New Age Journal. So this magazine assigns him the article and he goes to Mexico and spends 6 months to make this note for this magazine. When he sees that he doesn't reach conclusions and so on, well, he has to continue as a journalist. He is hand in hand with Padilla, in fact, at some moments of the investigation, and they are buddies for a while. So he finally writes the article. The article is an article that in total lasts about 17 pages. But what is published is an article that should have about 4 pages. So if he continues with the Los Angeles Times, well, I mean, I think when he does this, well, believe it or not, this is a fact. It's the first of his Red Note reports, as he calls it. It's the one about Grinberg. He later publishes a book about all these events. I mean, about 15 or 16 articles that he publishes in Mexico. And the only one he doesn't include in the book is the one about Grinberg. He says it's because the topic was different from the others or something like that, but it's not in Sam Quiñones' book. Hey, moving on to slightly more controversial topics, because let's focus a little on Padilla. Because in those times we know that Ernesto Zedillo was in the presidency. Okay, so let's focus a little on Padilla, who at that time was Ernesto Zedillo in the presidency. And Padilla says that suddenly, well, that first this was a direct order from the highest ranks to start investigating. But it really catches my attention, and I'm very curious to know what you think about that direct order. Do you think there could have been any interest from the government, that they might have been in communication about Grinberg? Because it really caught my attention that it was an order from the top, and then suddenly they went after Padilla the way they did and wanted to frame him. Okay, I'm going to give you the full context because this could lead to misunderstandings. There are 2 moments. The first moment is when the case is assigned to Padilla, and this doesn't come from the presidency, it comes from the Minister of Culture. Why? Because Tere Valle, the journalist, is very good friends with Grinberg and her husband, whose name I can't remember, is the Minister of Culture in Mexico. When the family is worried because Grinberg hasn't appeared, they go to see Tere Valle and ask her for help. She tells her husband, her husband, who is Minister of Culture in Mexico, a high-ranking official, he is the one who asked the prosecutor to put a team to find Grinberg, who is an important scientist and so on. So there, the prosecutor puts Padilla in charge, which is why he's from the judicial police. Normally, an investigation of this type would be handled by the federal police, like detectives, but it's handled by the judicial police because this comes directly from the prosecutor, who in Spain we would call the Attorney General of Justice. No, not the prosecutor. Well, I think it's the Attorney General. It's the prosecutor, which is also a political position. So they put Padilla in charge of the investigation. They tell him it's a very important case that they have, let's say, assigned it to him because he has an impeccable career. He was trained in the Special Forces in the U. He was also trained in the Mossad. I mean, Padilla was a guy who was very, let's say, well-trained and who, according to him, never left a case unsolved. He had solved all the cases that had been assigned to him. So Padilla takes charge of the investigation. He has a partner, and then they start investigating. According to Padilla, they were a very large team of people. He had about 20 people or so, and when he needed more, he would organize the teams. But he had a great team under his command when looking for Grinberg. The problem Padilla encounters from the beginning is that there is no body or any evidence of a murder. It's a missing person, but he can't blame any of the suspects because in reality, he can't blame any of the suspects directly or arrest anyone or make a real arrest warrant because there is no body, there is no crime. It's a disappearance that it's not even known if it was voluntary. At least legally it can't be known. So when Padilla starts to advance in the case and sees that Teresa knows something, he can't issue an arrest warrant for Teresa. When he talks to this watchman, who is Teresa's assistant, the guy lies to Padilla and says he hasn't talked to Teresa. When he has calls of 3 hours during days and days where Teresa and he talk, they can't blame him. He interrogates him several times, but in the end he has to let him go because there is no evidence of a crime. If there had been evidence of a crime, he could have arrested this person, interrogated him just like Teresa. Oh, Grinberg. Padilla illegally taps Teresa's parents' phone. There's another lie there, because Teresa's mom says she hasn't talked to her daughter in years. And he taps and sees that there are calls a month before Grinberg's disappearance. There are almost daily calls, a total of I don't know how many hours of calls between Maria Teresa and her mom. He finds Teresa's dog at her house. That is, Teresa's parents are lying. And Teresa is missing, but she shows signs of life. But what happens? That there is no evidence of a body, of a murder, and so he can't do anything. Not only this, but Teresa's parents are in the military. And what happens? That the military complain to the prosecutor's office and tell Padilla that he can no longer investigate or bother Teresa's parents. What a coincidence that they are military, right? Well, that's another thing. Yes, but there's a gap there. I tried to talk to them, and they told me they hadn't talked to their daughter in years and never wanted to be interviewed in the movie. But it's clear, they say they didn't know anything about Grinberg, and that the first time they see him is when Padilla shows them a photo. They didn't know their daughter was married to Grinberg, for example, so crazy. Padilla hits a wall. That is, he is advancing in the investigation, but he can't do anything. So, in reality, he is discovering many things, but at the same time, they are evidence that doesn't help him because, well, he can't continue with this investigation. The ideal would have been, well, to have an arrest warrant for Teresa, catch her, interrogate her, and have her tell us the truth, but, well, it wasn't possible. And then what happens? That when Padilla is at this point where, well, he says, it doesn't look good, it's like, how do they continue? Right at this moment, the Boulder witness appears. The Boulder witness, well, we already know, tells him that he sees Jacobo Grinberg and his wife, Tere Mendoza, getting off at a private airport in Boulder, Colorado, escorted by an FBI agent and an NSA agent, the National Security, who are deeply involved in all these matters. And it's a blonde woman. This blonde woman matches the blonde woman who accompanies Teresa. She is seen in Mexico picking up Teresa's things. She is seen leaving the dog. She is seen accompanying Teresa after the disappearance of Grinberg. And it's also a blonde from National Security who escorts Grinberg and Teresa along with an FBI agent at this airport. But Padilla, when he receives this information, he wants to thoroughly investigate everything that's happening, and suddenly that's when he starts facing obstacles from his own government. He wants to go to Boulder, but neither the family in the government nor anyone else gives him money to go investigate what's happening in Boulder. Because this witness later also tells him that he had seen Grinberg in a laboratory at the University of Boulder in a basement, that he took photos, but some agents took them away. I mean, it's a whole mess like that. And when this witness goes to Mexico because his cousin Gilda calls him and tells him to go to Mexico, this man, halfway through the journey from Mexico, from Michoacan, I think, from I don't know where to Mexico, his car breaks down and this witness is never heard from again, right? On one hand, this happens. On the other, the family and everyone don't believe Padilla. They say he's getting into conspiracy theories, that this thing with the CIA, the FBI having Grinberg kidnapped is already crazy and that it's getting out of hand. At this moment, President Ernesto Achedillo steps in, indirectly through his team, and asks Padilla for information. Padilla is surprised because the presidency is asking him for information about the case, and at the same time, they start hindering his investigation from the prosecutor's office itself. They send other people to Boulder, not him. It's strange because he says, why don't they let me go to Boulder to investigate what happened? And they send another agent and tell me that at the coordinates where I am sure there was an airport, they tell me there's a golf course and that there's no airport. Padilla tells me that he had investigated this place, these coordinates, and had downloaded printed photos from the internet of a map of an airport at this location, but then they tell him there's no airport there, that there's a golf course. So, at this moment, Padilla is discredited for all his investigation. They take him off the case, and not only that, but as he also recounts in the movie, in the end, they accuse him of car theft and kick him out of the police. That is to say, an impeccable police officer who has solved all the cases he has had so far, who is entrusted with a super important case that at that time, surely, let's see, we can think no one who puts Padilla in this operation knew there was anything important behind it. And it's when Padilla starts discovering important things that then everyone turns against him. And because he's solid, he's a guy who suddenly, because of this case, not only is he kicked off the case, but he's kicked out of the police and they ruin his career. So that's what he tells. And I talked many times with Padilla, and he seemed like a different kind of guy. A tough guy with character. You could see he was a cop, one of those who are going to get what they want. He seemed honest. If he also seemed a bit paranoid, scared. And paranoid sometimes in things he told you. I mean, you'd say, let's see, what the heck are you telling me now, right? Because suddenly he told me that papers had disappeared from his house and at night, almost as if some kind of entity had stolen them. He had told me this once. And there were moments where you'd say, Padilla, you're too much. I mean, he connected dots sometimes that seemed a bit strange, Like then, well, who knows? The truth is, sometimes you need just a little push from any other person or event that make us completely paranoid about everything. Well, yes, he was also thinking one thing. When I interviewed him, it was 20 years or more after he had investigated the case. He had all the documents stored, a huge backpack with everything. I mean, the whole investigation, photos of the witness, of Boulder, of Teresa, fingerprints, investigation reports, the exact days, those that were seen. Well, December 5th, this December 10th, you can see how he collects things. May 5th, he had the report of events, which I actually saw, and it was like literal, he had the whole investigation there in a huge backpack. He had videos, tapes, he had everything. And, Padilla in the end burned all of this. To me, when was it? Well, after we had dinner, he told me he had burned everything, that he had gotten rid of. I asked him why. He told me it took up a lot of space. But, he also made me understand that it wasn't just that it took up a lot of physical space, but that on a psychological level, it also took up a lot of space, all this material, and that he didn't want to have it. Also, I don't know if it was for some precaution in not wanting to have all these documents, and he burned it all, got rid of everything. And for him, deep down, I think it was a relief to be able to expose all this and get rid of all these documents from the investigation that he had for more than 20 years. Hey, Padilla's family, are there people who are still around? Do you know where they are? Do you think he made copies of the things? No, all of this was burned. He told me he had burned everything and, he wanted to get rid of it. What a shame. There's another thing that catches my attention that I wanted to ask you before continuing. That when they went to check after Jacobo disappeared at his house, the other guy who also interviewed Padilla, what's his name? He has a name, Ivanov. Yes, this guy said that Padilla told him in secret or aside that they had taken all of Grinberg's work, that there were no hard drives and all that. Yes, he says it was off the record, but in reality, Padilla says it clearly. That is, he says there was a data breach. Basically, what is clear is that the thesis Grinberg had, the last thesis, were not in his house. that the hard drives, the CPUs, all the stuff from those studies weren't there either. So, of course, when Padilla sees this, he also says, let's see, if it were a crime of passion, right? Because, let's see, Teresa and Grinberg, we know they didn't get along well, and Teresa apparently wanted to have kids, and he didn't. They had constant fights. Grinberg practically slept in a van that was outside the house. So the first thing they think is, well, fights, disputes. Grinberg, who had said he didn't get along well with his wife, a constant bad vibe. Grinberg kind of scared. Well, people said, well, maybe this woman killed him. Padilla says that if it had been a crime of passion, she would have behaved differently. She wouldn't have had everything so prepared, so meticulously planned. For example, in a crime of passion, you do it suddenly. It's not something you do, that you say, oh, well, I'm going to plan a crime, right? So, well, Padilla believes that. I don't know. Hang on. And here's wait, okay. The thing is that Padilla believes wasn't a crime of passion. And then when he sees the information theft, he says, well, wait a minute. If someone stole the information, it means the people who could have done something to him were interested in his research. It's not a crime of passion. And, there's something more behind this. And then her behavior is so calculated and studied, and how she plans false clues. It leads Padilla to Campeche, and in Campeche he realizes she made calls, but only for 1 minute. As if to distract the information and direct the police investigation's attention there. They plan he just disappears when everyone thinks he's in India. This gives them months to clean up all the evidence. And well, right, what we were saying about the hard drives and so on, well, this basically makes Padilla's attention turn towards Grinberg's investigations. And at this moment, Padilla goes all in to investigate and read his books. So it's a bit like the detective has to dress a bit like a scientist, a metaphysician, a shaman, if you will, to delve into Grinberg's universes, because he realizes that to solve the case, he has to delve into Grinberg's research and world's understand figure of Castaneda the sorcerers, in some way. There was a moment when Grinberg told me he wanted to have a map with all the shamans. You mean Padilla? Yes, Padilla wanted a map with all the shamans Grinberg had met, and at one point wanted to talk to all of them and see if together they could mentally locate Grinberg's whereabouts. People would suddenly come to him saying they had contacted Grinberg on an astral level or through channeling and told him where he had gone. Mediums also told him possible places he had been. He tried everything, right? Which complicates the investigation even more. Well, because there were people who everyone told him they saw him like underwater or underground, that he was captured. Everyone who approached at this level said he wasn't dead, at least at that time, that he was still alive but in another dimension. Or that, like he was but wasn't. But no one, even rabbis they had gone to, they said that. All right, Grinberg is Jewish. Of course, and there were rabbis. There are certain degrees that have psychic powers too. And, all the people who approached these levels said that Grinberg was still here in some way. So, of course, Padilla was there, wanting to find him. But, there's a lot of they kick him off the case, and that's it. And then, lastly, there's the issue, of course, they get into the investigations. The last conferences Grinberg gave there. The conference is in Costa Rica, where Padilla says that when he returns from this conference, he looks uneasy, he looks nervous, Grinberg seems different. Even in Guadalajara, at another conference he goes to, it's seen that he's hospitalized, but he hides it and no one knows. And it's precisely these conferences where apparently Jacques Vallée was also present, Andrija, Puharich, John Keel, and there's another fact that Grinberg disappears on December 8, 1994. It's the last time he's seen. December 12th was his birthday and he didn't go. So he's not seen anymore. Between the 8th and the 12th of December seems to be the time when this disappearance occurred. And in January of 95, if I'm not mistaken, in January exactly of 95, Andrija Puharich dies. The evidence of Puharich's death at first is natural, but talking to people around him, they tell me it was also strange. It would be necessary to investigate Puharich's case well, to understand if the death of Puharich had any connotation or something that wasn't so natural. And what is a fact is that in the year 95, I think also in January, February, the Stargate program ends in March of 95. In March, Grinberg disappears, Puharich dies, the Stargate program stops functioning, in quotes. The conclusions reached are that the Stargate program and all its subsequent programs, MK Ultra and others, all of them, after millions and millions of dollars invested over 40 years, yield no results. That is, it cannot be demonstrated that the phenomena of extrasensory perception have existed or have been demonstrated within these programs. And they simply stop functioning and end in, as you say, in March of 95. Now maybe they continue functioning under another name, right? as usually happens with this type of projects. Yes, the Institute of Noetic Sciences has continued all this work for many years, but it is not an institute sanctioned by the government as Stargate was. Of course, the Institute of Noetic Sciences is Dean Radin. Dean Radin, in his latest book, a book called Real Magic. In this book, even on the back cover, you can read that he says he was part of the Stargate project, and that in the Stargate project they reached clear evidence that all the phenomena of extrasensory perception were proven. I mean, they demonstrated cases of telepathy, remote viewing, telekinesis. And in his book, he provides statistical data on how all this was achieved. On the other hand, the official version is that nothing was achieved, but Dean Radin is there with his institute calmly, conducting his experiments, statistically proving phenomena of this type, and well, no one has interrupted these investigations. This is what I find strange. Although in this book of Real Magic by Dean Radin, there is a moment where he gives an example and says that, now I can't be positive, I would have to look for the exact quote, but he says there are very powerful forces and that one has to know when facing forces greater than oneself, and that when one does, one has to be smart and side with these forces. If you want, I'll look for the quote later and send it to you, because when I read this quote, I thought here Dean Radin is clearly telling you that you can't go against the system. I mean, when you suddenly encounter these great forces, well, you have to understand it and align yourself, right, in some way, and know what you can and cannot do. And he says this quite clearly in the book. I'll look for it and pass it to you. And with the, sometimes even in some of your videos on your YouTube channel, I don't know if it was Leah or Ruth, I think it was Ruth, who talks about how Jacobo would explode a lot. Very often when they were doing experiments and when Leah was, I don't remember if she was pregnant, that she had to go somewhere. No, now I remember. She had to go dance because she was also a dancer, that Jacobo got upset because he couldn't continue with the experiment. This indicates that Jacobo was also quite rebellious in many ways. So I could imagine that if he had been presented with this problem of not going against the system, probably Jacobo would have rebelled a bit. Yes, Grinberg, let's see what you say. On one hand, Grinberg was very passionate. He also had, he was a guy that suddenly Leah, for example, describes him as a neurotic, enlightened one. So everyone describes him as a super passionate, excited, intuitive guy, because sometimes suddenly he would sit in a chair and say, oh, who sat in this chair? What bad vibes? And he would leave. But he was a guy with a very, very, strong character and very emotional, but he was rebellious. Grinberg was very Uranian, and in astrological terms, he had Uranus in opposition, which means he had a side that was very Promethean, in the sense of someone who rebels against structures, against the establishment of the French Revolution. Uranus is a planet that was discovered right around the time of the French Revolution, and he has characteristics somewhat of that moment. So Grinberg was a guy who liked to do things his way. He didn't like being told what to do. He was a rebel. So obviously if a power figure comes and tells Grinberg what to do, he's going to rebel, and this is clear. It's something he has always manifested. When Pachita tells him that he can mention that he met Pachita at Los Pinos with Maria Teresa López Portillo, the president's sister, Grinberg says he doesn't care. He's going to publish it. When the editor in Spain tells him not to publish certain things about Castaneda, he says he doesn't care. He's going to publish it. Grinberg doesn't understand the concept of being submissive and doing things as he's told. He does things his way, and he says it very clearly. So yes, it could be that this character influenced what eventually happened to him. Last question to wrap up, and I was saving this one for now because I was very intrigued by a recent video you made on your YouTube channel, where you show one of the people who collaborated with Jacobo talking about how Castaneda probably had a disagreement with him over some publications made in Spain. An editor was talking to him. So my question is, do you think Carlos Castaneda was aware of all the work Grinberg was doing, and that Castaneda, I don't know if he could have had contact with these intelligence services there, because it seemed to me that he was very well protected there because of how important he was to the countercultural movement and all. This also gives me a lot of vibes of Charles Manson, his case, Castaneda's with Charles Manson's. So my question goes in that direction. Do you think they had a conflict at the end? And that there is also the possibility that one of the other theories is that Castaneda could have been involved in his disappearance? Or what is your perspective on all this? Let's see. Castaneda at some point might think about that. I'm not going to deny it. But then talking to Manuel Carvajal, who wrote the biography of Castaneda, and studying the topic a bit more in depth, I realized that there could have been conflicts between them, obviously. This fact that is talked about in this video you mentioned was never published. Grinberg wanted to publish it, but it was never published in the end because Grinberg, I don't know if he disappeared before it was published. I'm not sure how it went, but it was never published. This event where apparently Castaneda tells Grinberg that he has suppressed a person with the power of his mind, his magic or something like that, could also be Castaneda boasting. I mean, Castaneda, for example, Amy Wallace says that he is writing before he dies. He tells Amy Wallace, this is in her book, Sorcerer's Apprentice, My Life, with Carlos Castaneda, that he is writing a book about himself, Castaneda, in which he recounts his years as a spy or a hitman for the CIA in Spain. Castaneda tells this to Amy Wallace, but this book never comes out. And what is said, or what I've been told, is that surely Castaneda was teasing Amy Wallace, or simply Castaneda's circle never let this come out. In the investigation that Manuel Carvajal did, he tried to find out if there was any connection between Castaneda and the CIA. He saw that no, there had never been any connection between them. So those are the results of this investigation. I haven't studied it more in depth, but there really is no evidence that Castaneda was involved in the disappearance. Besides, Castaneda dies 4 years later and Grinberg never appears there again, nor does anyone else see him in his circle. So I also spoke with Tony Karam about this, and he tells me, yes, I also thought it could have been that Grinberg went with Castaneda or something like that, but he has never appeared in this circle. So the most normal thing is that Castaneda and Grinberg had their disagreements, especially because of Castaneda's somewhat sectarian behavior within his circle. And as Amy Wallace recounts, Castaneda had sexual relations with all his disciples and, well, a bit of the control, manipulation environment they had in Castaneda's last years in his inner circle. But I don't think there was a correlation between Castaneda and Grinberg and the disappearance, you know? And, well, Castaneda, you have to know how to separate his work, which is incredible. I think books with spectacular content, apart from how well written they are and how incredible they are. I mean, the wisdom in his books is incredible. So Castaneda probably was a bit of a victim of his own fame and ended up somehow being a victim of his own, I don't know, his own spiritual force, because he's a guy that everyone who has been with him says he was magnetic, he was spectacular. I mean, being with Castaneda was like being with someone of those people you see and say they have a special aura. But maybe later on he was drawn to worldly pleasures and wanted to somehow use this power to gain certain benefits, which is what almost always happens with power. It ends up corrupting. Well, it's very Jedi-like. Either you stay pure, unblemished, or there's a force, well, the dark side force that can drag you. Who knows? Castaneda is a very, very, very paradoxical character, and the people who follow him can justify his actions in the name of teachings that could only be given by acting this way with his disciples. And many people will justify Castaneda's actions because it was the way his teachings had to be transmitted. So we enter a rather murky area where everyone can understand it from a perspective. Thank you very much for a great weekend. Thank you. Are you coming back soon? I hope so. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks. Okay, thank you.